and all the books that we collaborate on involve a couple phases because, of course, like you said, we work our way through just telling the story. But the fact that you got two people telling the story adds some complexity to it. And so there's almost like a second or third writing phase that goes into like, okay, how do all these themes connect? And this characters that showed up here and here, what's the through line for them that we need to add in? And I think maybe Room 138 probably had the biggest like second and third phase in terms of like, okay, we have all this time travel, does it all make sense? Okay, all the things that he does in these different time periods, do they all line up? And then of course, as the character is having the background of the fact that he doesn't know why it's happening and is having to figure it out, there's a phase where we as the authors don't necessarily know why it's happening. And as we figured out, we kind of had to look at it and then go back and say, okay, now that we understand this, we need to go back and adjust things here and there so that that lines up perfectly, and it looks like we knew what we were doing the entire time.
Right. Yeah.
So I really like how 138 turned out, and it was a lot of work to get there. In terms of like, okay, now that we know the ending, and we go back to the beginning, and we see all these clues that are here, we got to connect all these things in a way that's not entirely confusing. And of course, as with any situation where a character's figuring things out as they go, there's always that part where like a reader's going to say, oh yeah, okay, that's what that meant, and that's what that meant, and sometimes even go back and look again to pick up on all those little Easter eggs that were thrown in as we went.
And you took the lead on the edits and all that stuff at the end, which is great because, to be honest, like that, I think that would have been harder for me than writing the book because there were so many things that I knew, a lot of characters, a lot of threads that probably didn't make sense by the time we got to the end. And when I wrapped it up at the end, I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna worry about every little thread because I started once we got to like the last three chapters, I actually started like kind of skimming through again
Mm-hmm.
and seeing what we left. And then it was like an index card, and then it was like an entire page of, and I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna wrap all this up. So let's just finish the first draft, and then we'll go back and do other drafts of it. And then you were already kind of playing in past chapters already as we're going along,
Right.
moving things around and adjusting. So we were kind of keeping that in mind. I mean, at one point when I was doing that, I'm like, well, I don't even know what draft we're in now because we write a first draft, but in the meantime, we're also going back and playing, and I'm checking your chapter for typos or something. You're checking mine. So as the book is progressing, we're also doing a light edit on it as well, and sometimes we're creating characters, and I'm making a note. Okay, Jay just created this character.
Yeah.
But then it's also, okay, is this Jay's character? Does Jay have an idea for this character or not? And so that's kind of the fun too of, do I need to touch this character? Do I need to do anything with this character? Have you set me up for the next chapter? This character will be involved, or is this somewhere down the line that you will create a new character? So there's a lot of those. There's a lot of characters, obviously, in this book when you're jumping through time.
Right.
And I also tried to. I think in the beginning too, when we started, I was overthinking it. Of, all right, what are the science fiction fans going to say? What are people who read time travel books? Are we going to look like idiots? Are we putting stuff and somebody goes, well, quantum physics says, well, he would be if he's there, his older self would be there, or his younger, like all these.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? We can't think like that. It's fiction. We're having fun. Let's just write it and not worry about all those, things.
I didn't really think about fan base as we were writing this, but looking at time travel, you have a pretty big range of what science fiction readers like, and then you get into time travel, and you have a more specific reader that likes certain things, doesn't like certain things, and they almost like categorize time travel stories into groups, like, oh, this one's a loop, and this one is changing the past, and this one's more of the time travel fairy tale. All the things that they divide up, and they like certain ones of those and they don't like others. And of course, one of the keys for a lot of time travel readers is they want the rules to be consistent. So whatever you set up has to play through, and that's kind of where our book got interesting, because it wasn't that the rules were magical, but there was some unseen agent involved in terms of how and why he would move from one room to another. So it's not like he stepped into a time machine. There were other elements involved that move them through, and then sort of the rules of how and what gets changed and that kind of thing. The funny thing was, the very first time travel book I wrote was a book called Time Eaters, and it combined time travel and extreme horror. So there were like people went crazy when they traveled through time.
Classic.
And so you would end up with like insane people showing up places, and they would turn cannibalistic and all this other stuff. And I discovered that one thing that time travel hi-fi fans do not like is extreme horror. So I picked the perfect combination of two things that made the most niche audience of all. So fortunately, I think our time travel book is a broader appeal. So I think that's a plus for us.
Well, I think when I edited out your insane cannibals in a couple of those chapters, I think that probably helped the book.
Yeah, leaving out the insane cannibals was a pretty good idea.
Probably a good move.
It is funny when you talk about our editing as we go, because we'll do that occasionally in other books, but I think this is the book where it happened the most, and a lot of it was me just trying to make sense of it, because I knew that we were gonna in our collaborations, like, our skill sets tend to be where kind of keeping the story Bible, and then make the continuity play out is kind of my strength. So I'm kind of the guy that can go back and say, okay, we had a red shirt here, so it needs to be red back here, that kind of thing. But sort of, I probably could have waited, and it might have been better if I did. But we would start to see, okay, this is important to the story, and I would kind of go back and say, okay, where is 3 places I could put this in the past that would make sense? I can smooth it out later, but let me just either mention it or make it part of the conversation, or have it show up in the background, or whatever it is. And so I put a bunch of those things in, but I still, when we went back through the book, I still had to connect all those pieces. So even though I'd placed them, it was still pretty much the same amount of work in terms of putting them through. But in the end, I think it made a pretty solid book.